Vienna, 1907, just as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled noon and the imperial standard was raised above Schönbrunn Palace. Odette Bellamy adjusted the pale lace at her collar, her gloves damp with nervous sweat beneath the stiff cuffs of her uniform. She was 22, daughter of an American diplomat who had died of fever in Tangier, and had since been absorbed into the minor machinery of the Austro-Hungarian court as a companion to Archduchess Maria Valerie's youngest niece. It was a strange place for her, neither noble nor servant, not quite foreign and never truly accepted, but she had learned to move through the palace like mist, silent, modest, invisible. Except to him. "Miss Bellamy," came the voice from behind the curtain, low and careful. She turned. He stepped into view, his boots quiet over the parquet. Captain Rainer Zelnik, aide-de-camp to the Emperor's cousin and newly appointed military tutor to Archduke Leopold. He was tall, clean-shaven, his tunic crisp with the silver piping of a cavalry officer. His voice held the clipped edge of someone used to command, but his eyes gray and quick held warmth. "You're early," Odette said, surprised to find her heart already racing. "I prefer quiet halls," Rainer replied. "And I heard the Archduke has begun fencing lessons." "She has." Odette tilted her head. "Though she duels more with words than blades." "Then I'll need armor." She smiled, but it faltered as she heard the sharp echo of heels. A lady-in-waiting passed with a nod, her gaze too pointed. Odette stepped back into shadow, but Rainer didn't move. "You shouldn't linger here," she said under her breath. "I know." He looked at her for a long moment. "But I wanted to return this." He pulled something from his coat, a handkerchief, embroidered with neat initials, O.B. It had gone missing 2 days ago after she'd left it behind in the Imperial Library. "You found it." "I kept it." A flush rose to her cheeks. "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I knew you would come looking." But she hadn't. She'd buried the loss beneath silk layers of duty. She couldn't afford sentiment in a palace where affection was currency, and love, true love, was too costly to survive. Before she could respond, a bell chimed from the next corridor. Rainer stepped back. "You'll be at the garden procession?" "I'm expected." "Then I'll find you." He disappeared through the archway with the measured stride of a man who belonged. Odette stood still, her breath caught between dread and something dangerously close to hope. By late afternoon, the gardens of Schönbrunn were a sea of parasols and pressed uniforms. The Emperor's nephews paraded down the gravel paths on horseback, their mothers clapping politely. Odette stood behind the rose trellises with the other companions, her face composed. "Miss Bellamy," a servant whispered, slipping a note into her gloved hand with a tray of sugared almonds. She unfolded it beside her skirts. "North Colonnade. At dusk." The handwriting was firm. Mail. Familiar. At dusk, she slipped away. No one noticed. The colonnade was quiet, the marble cooled by twilight. Rainer stood near a column, his posture too rigid for someone off duty. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "You are." He looked tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing you don't want to give." She swallowed. "That's a dangerous line to walk here." He stepped closer. "You don't belong in this place, Odette." "Not really." "I know. You stay because you must. Because you have no family. No claim." She flinched. The truth hurt more when spoken aloud. "I stay because I have nowhere else to go." "I could be somewhere else," he said. "But I stay because of you." Her breath caught. "Ever since Tangier, when your father died, you've been passed from court to court like a forgotten letter. But I see you. I always have." She shook her head, emotion rising fast. "You don't know me." "I do. And I know you left a letter in the back of the fencing manual for Archduchess Maria sealed, but never sent. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. Her cheeks blanched. You. It was addressed to someone named Elias. Your brother. Her hand trembled. My half-brother. He was left behind in Boston when I came to Europe. I haven't seen him since I was 8. I can find him. She stared. Why would you do that? Because you deserve something real. A family. A future. He stepped closer, his voice low. And because I want to be part of it. A cry rang out from the far lawn. Then running footmen, guards, the rustle of alarm. Rainer's hand went to his sword. Stay here. She grabbed his sleeve. What is it? I don't know. He looked toward the palace. But I need to go. He ran. She followed. They reached the terrace just as a servant stumbled forward, bleeding from the side, a knife still in his belt. He collapsed at the Emperor's steward's feet. Assassins, the man gasped. In disguise inside the palace. Tonight. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted. Nobles screamed. The heir apparent was rushed away under cover of cloaks. Rainer turned to her, breath harsh. Go to your chambers. Lock the door. Don't speak to anyone. You'll be blamed, she said. You're the new tutor. They'll say you let them in. I can handle that. No, she said. You need proof. And I know where to look. He frowned. Where? The north wing. The old music room. No one uses it anymore, but last week, I saw a man I didn't recognize going in. He said he was with the opera company, but we haven't hosted one in a month. His expression changed. Then we go now. They slipped through the hedge, moving behind columns, ducking under servant passages. The music room was dark. Dust coated the harpsichord. But behind the tapestry. A door. He pushed it open. Inside, a cot. Maps. Uniforms. A coded message half burned in the fireplace. Rainer scanned it. These are plans. For Leopold's route to Trieste next week. They're planning another attack, Odette whispered. His hand found hers. You just saved a prince. You found the proof. They stared at each other. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Rainer pulled her behind the tapestry. Guards burst in. One wore the wrong insignia. Rainer stepped out, fast. This man is not of our regiment. The guard froze. Then lunged. Odette grabbed the fire poker and struck hard. The false guard went down. Silence. Rainer looked at her, stunned. You just. I had good aim in Tangier. He laughed, breathless. Then cupped her face. I'm going to kiss you now. You're going to get us both thrown in a dungeon. I don't care. She didn't either. When the true guards arrived, the story unfolded quickly, the false operatives, the planned ambush, the stolen documents. Rainer's name was cleared. Odette's too. By morning, the Emperor had summoned them both. You've done this court a service, he said, voice heavy with fatigue. But your presence here now complicates things. Odette bowed her head. I understand. Rainer did not bow. Then I request her release into my protection. As my future wife. Gasps. Then silence. The Emperor studied them. You're certain? I am. And you, Miss Bellamy? I am. The Emperor sighed. Then leave. Quietly. No fanfare. No scandal. They left before noon. No carriage. No guards. Just the quiet click of their boots down the palace stairs, and the sun warm on their shoulders. Odette glanced up. You meant it? About Elias? I already sent a letter to Boston. She blinked hard. He took her hand. "You're not alone anymore." And she wasn't. Not ever again. Autumn settled into the folds of the Salzkammergut countryside with a hush, brushing the lake's edge with bronze and gold. The rented house near Hallstatt, modest by imperial standards, had been chosen by Rainer for its seclusion. A former hunting lodge once owned by a minor baron, it bore the scent of pine resin and old wood smoke, its shutters painted deep green, the garden overgrown but not unwelcoming. Odette had taken to rising early, before the chiming of the church bells, to walk the inner paths where the morning mist still clung to the hedges. The shift from palace marble to moss-covered flagstones had not been seamless. She kept her gloves longer than necessary, her manners sharp, her posture tighter than the air required. But each day, something loosened, her breath, her shoulders, the knot behind her ribs. One morning, she returned from the orchard with a basket of wind-fallen pears and found Rainer bent over a small writing desk in the corner of the drawing room. He was marking a map with red chalk, his uniform jacket discarded over a chair, his sleeves rolled back to the elbows. "You've been at that for hours," she said, setting the basket down. He didn't look up. "The ministry sent word yesterday. They're forming a review commission to investigate the military tutors." Her brow furrowed. "But you were cleared." "Only in the court's eyes. The ministry has its own suspicions. They don't like gaps in records, or men who act without orders." She stepped closer. "What will they ask you?" "Why I was in the music wing before the guards arrived. Why I trusted your word without evidence. Why I left my post on the Crown Prince's security detail to chase a hunch." Odette sat slowly. "Do they suspect me? They'll want to know who you are. Why you were there. Why you weren't accounted for during the alarm." Her voice grew quiet. "Because I never belonged on the ledgers." Rainer finally met her eyes. "Exactly." Silence followed. Outside, a hawk circled above the trees. Then she said, "I can leave." "No. I can go to Lausanne. Or Bruges. Find work." He folded the map. "You're not fleeing again. Not for me." She hesitated. "Then what do we do?" "We answer them. Together." That evening, they rode to the village on horseback. The low sun painted the lake in amber streaks. Odette hadn't ridden since Morocco, but the rhythm came back like breath. Rainer stayed beside her, his boots light in the stirrups, reins held with ease. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. At the inn, they met with Herr Kallner, a retired archivist who had once catalogued court appointments under Franz Joseph's father. The man was thin as a fence rail, his spectacles fogging as he poured tea. "Your name was never formally entered into the court registry," he told Odette. "But I remember you. You stood beside Archduchess Wilhelmine during the coronation mass 2 years ago." Odette blinked. "That was never recorded. The court photographer had a plate. It was never published, but the negative exists. I know where it's kept." Rainer nodded. "We'll need it." The archivist leaned forward. "But take care. If you force the court to acknowledge an unofficial appointment, you'll force them to admit they failed to document a foreign guest under imperial protocol. That's a dangerous embarrassment." Odette said, "Then we don't force them. We let them choose." They left with a letter and the direction to a photography atelier in Linz. On the ride back, Rainer said nothing, but his hand found hers through the reins. Later, in the quiet of the lodge, she sat at the window with a book, the fire behind her throwing soft yellow light across the pages. Rainer entered with a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it before her. It arrived. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a letter, the paper stiff from its journey, and a photograph. A boy, 17 perhaps, standing on the steps of a Boston schoolhouse, holding a violin case. She touched the edge. "Elias." "There's more," Rainer said. She looked up. He's written back. Says he kept every letter you left him. Even the ones you never sent. Tears slipped down without warning. She wiped them quickly. I never thought I'd see him again. You will. She reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. He didn't speak. Instead, he leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, breath even, steady. Later, she returned to her room and opened the wardrobe. Her court gowns, though few, hung there still. She chose one of deep mulberry silk, discreet in its elegance, then retrieved the glove she had worn at the procession the day before the attack. She would return to Vienna. Not as a companion, nor as a shadow. Beside her, folded into the hem of the gown, she tucked the photograph of Elias, and the letter bearing her name in his hand. Whatever the court demanded, she would face it. Not because she owed them anything, but because she had found something stronger than fear. She had found him. Hidden in plain sight. The air in Vienna had already begun to thin with the approach of winter when Odette stepped from the train at Westbahnhof, her gloves newly mended, her coat freshly brushed. The city, always severe in its grandeur, felt unfamiliar now not for its monuments or boulevards, but because she no longer walked it in silence. Rainer was not beside her. He had remained in Hallstatt to avoid drawing the ministry's attention. With his name still under scrutiny, his presence in the capital could provoke questions they weren't yet prepared to answer. So she came alone. Her Kölner's instructions had been precise. The photograph negative, stored in an archival drawer at the Atelier Eisenberg near the Ringstrasse, was to be retrieved discreetly and delivered to Countess Helene Strachwitz, an aging noblewoman who had once served as lady-in-waiting to Empress Elizabeth. The Countess's influence among the Hofburg's archivists and secretaries could smooth the path that official channels would only obstruct. Odette arrived at the atelier just after midday. The building was narrow, its windows shuttered, the inside dim with the scent of old chemicals and dry wood. Herr Eisenberg, a stooped man with a mild tremor in his left hand, greeted her without recognition. I've come on behalf of Herr Kölner, she said, keeping her voice low. She offered the sealed note. He read it slowly, then nodded, disappearing behind a curtain. When he returned, he held a slim envelope between two fingers. It's fragile, he said. Handle it only in daylight. She thanked him and stepped back into the street, the envelope tucked securely inside the lining of her coat. The sky had gone overcast, and the wind coiled through the arcades with a bite. She walked without pause, each step deliberate, until she reached the Countess's residence near the Berggarten, a house of pale stone, its windows shuttered against the season. Inside, the furniture remained unchanged since the previous reign. The woman who greeted her wore a high-necked gown of navy wool, her hair coiled and pinned with ivory combs. She studied Odette carefully, eyes sharp beneath her lace veil. Your father was Samuel Bellamy, she said. He once delivered a parcel of books to the Empress from Paris. He wore ill-fitting boots and spoke with a Massachusetts drawl. Odette inclined her head. That sounds like him. The Countess took the envelope without another word. She crossed to the hearth, lifted the lid of a lacquered box, and placed the envelope inside. You'll be summoned within 3 days, she said. You will not speak unless addressed. Do not mention the incident in the North Wing. That matter has been buried for good reason. Odette hesitated. What if they ask? They won't. The summons arrived sooner than expected by footman, hand-delivered, sealed with the twin-headed eagle of the Empire. She was to appear not before the Emperor, but before the Chamber of Records and Ceremonial Appointments, a committee of 6 men and 1 woman, whose names were known only to those who had served the court for decades. She wore a gown of charcoal gray silk, modest in cut, with a brooch of pressed violets at the collar. Her hair was pinned in a crown braid, her gloves unadorned. The proceedings took place in a narrow salon lined with portraits of former state archivists, their expressions as severe as their wigs. The woman at the far end of the table spoke first. Miss Bellamy, she said, you were never formally entered into the court registry. And yet you appeared in at least 3 official events, including the coronation mass. Odette kept her hands folded. Yes. Who authorized your presence? No one did, Odette said. I was taken in by the Archduchess Maria Valerie as an informal companion. There was no contract. No stipend. One of the men leaned forward. Why did you remain if you held no position? Because I was useful. Another voice spoke, this one low and clipped. You had access to restricted wings of the palace. I was not given access, she said. I followed instructions. I accompanied the Archduchess where she led. They conferred in brief glances. Then the woman asked, do you seek recognition retroactively, or do you wish to sever your association? Odette's throat tightened. I seek acknowledgement. Not for myself. For the sake of clarity. The woman nodded slowly. Do you currently reside under the protection of any titled family? No. Do you intend to marry? Yes. To whom? Captain Rainer Zelnik. The room stilled. That is not a court-approved union, one of the men said. His commission is still under review. Odette met his eyes. Then review us together. The woman gave a faint smile, the first sign of expression on her face. You're remarkably composed for someone with no rank. I've had practice, Odette said. They dismissed her with a murmur. The entire encounter lasted less than an hour. That night, she returned to her lodging on the edge of the city, a small flat rented quietly under a friend's name. It overlooked a narrow canal, its waters sluggish with fallen leaves. She lit a single lamp, sat at the desk, and pulled out the last letter from Elias. There was no address, only a promise. He would come in the spring. A knock sounded at the door. She opened it cautiously. Rainer stood there, hat in hand, his coat damp at the hem. I couldn't stay away, he said. I had to know. She stepped aside. He entered without hesitation, closing the door behind him. They've seen the photograph, she said. They can't deny I was there. They won't try, he said. The Countess sent word. Their decision is already written. She turned to him. And your commission? They'll reinstate it. On condition I accept a post in Sarajevo. Her breath caught. When? Late January. She sat slowly. That's not a place they send favored officers. No, he said. It's where they send those who know too much but did nothing wrong. She looked at the floor. Then we go. His eyes widened. You'd come. I've lived in a palace where I was invisible. I've stood before men who decided whether I existed. I've had my name struck from records. Nothing they offer me now is worth staying for. He reached for her hand. You wouldn't have comfort. Or safety. I'd have you. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he said, we leave at the year's end. Quietly. She nodded. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass. Inside, the lamp burned steady. The train to Sarajevo cut east through the Styrian Alps, its carriages echoing with the muted clatter of polished wheels and the low murmurs of officers and civil servants bound for their winter posts. Odette sat near a window, her hands resting in her lap, a wool blanket folded over her knees. The air inside the compartment carried the scent of coal smoke and iron, cleaner than the palace corridors, but colder too. Rainer sat across from her, poring over a stack of sealed documents tied with a green cord, the imperial seal unbroken. He hadn't spoken since they changed trains in Graz. She didn't press. The rhythm of their silence had changed, no longer edged with uncertainty, but full of quiet anticipation. Outside, bare trees streaked past in shades of gray and rust, the sky low and unyielding. In the reflection on the windowpane, she could see him glance up at her, once, then return to his reading. They arrived at dusk. Sarajevo's station was smaller than Vienna's, its lamps few and flickering under the weight of an early snow. A man in a thick wool coat, wearing the insignia of the gendarmerie, greeted Rainer with a bow and handed him a folded page. He read it quickly, lips pressed tight, then nodded toward the waiting carriage. "The house is at the edge of the old Turkish quarter," he said once they were inside, his voice low. "It belongs to a retired court physician. They've assigned it to me for the duration." Odette shifted. "Will it be safe?" He gave a dry breath. "It's a quiet post. I'm meant to observe, nothing more." The carriage jolted forward. Through the rounded windows, the city unfolded narrow streets, the domes of mosques lined in frost, the spires of Austro-Hungarian administration buildings casting long shadows across wooden merchant shops. The city bore its history without apology. Here was no marble veneer, no illusion of timeless grace. Stone met stone without ornament, and every corner whispered of watching eyes. The house stood just above the Miljacka River, its shutters painted deep blue, the garden behind it tangled with sleeping vines. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of medical texts in Latin and Ottoman Turkish, the floors scrubbed clean but uneven with age. A tall stove, tiled in pale green glaze, warmed the parlor with a steady crackle. That night, after the trunks were brought in and the fire stoked, Rainer hung his coat by the door and stepped into the lamplight. "They've stationed a liaison from the provincial council in the next district," he said. "A man named Avdovic. He's known for keeping detailed records. If anything stirs, he'll be our first warning." Odette nodded, running her fingers along the edge of a carved walnut chair. "Do they know I'm here?" "Officially, you're listed as a private tutor on the household manifest." He paused. "To a child that doesn't exist." She looked up. "They still want me hidden. They want the story simple." She stepped closer. "And what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. Then, with a slowness that felt like reverence, he took her hand. "I want you with me. Whether they see it or not." The weeks passed with a hush that neither of them expected. Rainer reported to the district office each morning, his presence required only by formality. The unrest that had shadowed the empire's eastern territories for years had slipped into uneasy stillness, the first snow muffling even the sharpest tensions. Odette spent her days in the house writing letters to Elias, sorting through the old physician's books, and sketching the city from the upstairs window. One morning, she found a copper-bound journal tucked behind a loose floorboard in the library. Its pages were written in French, the hand tight and elegant. Notes on anatomy, field remedies, and a list of patients marked only by initials. She turned a page and paused. An entry from 2 decades earlier, describing the birth of a child in Vienna delivered during a winter storm, no midwife present. The mother was listed only as M.V. She closed the book, her pulse quickening. That evening, after supper, she placed it on the table before Rainer. "Did your superiors know this house belonged to a physician who served in the imperial household?" He turned the cover slowly. "No. At least, not officially." She tapped the page. "This entry. It names the date and street. Maria Valerie gave birth to a child that winter, but no record of it exists. She was married by then. Any child would have been recognized." Odette shook her head. "Unless it wasn't her husband's." He looked up sharply. "That's a dangerous thing to suggest." "It's not a suggestion. It's a question." He exhaled, then leaned back. "If this is true, it explains why the house was left off the estate ledgers for so long. And why I was never fully entered into the registry," she said quietly. He stilled. "You think this child?" "I don't know what I think." She stood, crossing to the window. Snow had begun to fall again, the flakes fine and light. "After my father died, the Archduchess refused to let me be sent back to America. She said it would be cruel. But what if it wasn't just kindness?" She turned. What if I wasn't just in her care, what if I was hers? Rainer looked at the journal again, his expression unreadable. I'll ask Kulner, he said at last. Quietly. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. Later, as the fire quieted to embers, he drew a chair beside hers and placed a folded cloth in her lap. She opened it to find a brooch, a small golden lark, wings outstretched. It was my mother's, he said. She wore it on the day she met my father. He passed it to me the year I joined the army. She traced the edge of the bird's wing. Why give it to me? He met her gaze. Because you're not lost. And you never were. Outside, the night deepened over the city, but inside the house, the light held.